She stood on that auction block, 23 years old and worth less than a lame horse, until a stranger bid $500 for her life. This is the story of Mara Hale, a woman sold like cattle by her own blood, who discovered that survival isn't the same as living. What happens when kindness feels more dangerous than cruelty? When the cage door opens, but you've forgotten how to fly, stay until the end to see how one choice can rewrite everything. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. The sun that morning came up angry. It always did in Dry Hollow, beating down on the dusty streets like it had a personal grudge against anything foolish enough to be alive. By 9 o'clock, the heat was already thick enough to choke on, turning the air into something you had to wade through rather than breathe. The kind of heat that made men mean and dogs lazy, that baked the street into hardpan and sucked the moisture right out of your bones. Mara Hale had stopped sweating an hour ago. That's when you knew you were in trouble, when your body just gave up on trying to cool itself down and resigned itself to cooking from the inside out. She stood in the narrow strip of shade behind Hutchins' general store, her wrists bound with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. The rope wasn't necessary. She had nowhere to run, no one to run to. But her brother Jacob had insisted. "Can't have you making a scene," he'd said that morning, not quite meeting her eyes as he tied the knots. His hands had shaken. Guilt, maybe. Or just the tremors he got when he needed a drink. Probably the drink. Mara didn't struggle. Struggling was for people who still had hope. And she'd buried that particular luxury about 3 months back, right around the time Jacob had started looking at her different. Not like a sister, like an asset, like something that could be converted into cash. The auction wasn't supposed to start until 10, but people were already gathering in the town square. Mara could hear them, the low rumble of men's voices, the occasional bark of laughter. Someone was tuning a fiddle, the discordant notes scraping across her nerves. They were making a party of it. Of course they were. Entertainment was sparse in Dry Hollow, and watching the Hale girl get sold off would provide enough gossip to fuel conversations through the winter. Time to go. Jacob's voice made her flinch even though she'd been expecting it. He appeared in the alley entrance, backlit by the brutal sun so she couldn't see his face. Probably better that way. She wasn't sure she could stand to see whatever expression he was wearing. Shame, determination, the hollow-eyed desperation that had become his constant companion since he'd discovered poker and whiskey made a better family than she ever could. "Jake, don't." He cut her off, his voice sharp. Then, softer, almost pleading. "Just don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder than it needs to be. As if there was an easy way to be sold by your own blood. As if any amount of cooperation could make this dignified. But Mara didn't argue. She'd learned young that arguing with Jacob was like arguing with the weather, pointless and exhausting. She let him take her arm and guide her out of the alley, into the pressing crowd and the merciless light. The auction block stood in the center of the square, a rough wooden platform about 4 feet high. Usually it was used for livestock sales, horses, cattle, the occasional mule. Today it would serve a different purpose, though Mara supposed the principle was the same. She was livestock now, whatever pretty words people might use to dress it up. The crowd parted as Jacob led her through, and Mara felt their eyes on her like physical weight. Some looked away quick, embarrassed or guilty. Others stared openly, appraising. A few women whispered behind their hands, mouths pursed in judgment or pity. Mara couldn't tell which and didn't much care. Samuel Hutchins stood on the platform, thumbs hooked in his vest pockets, looking pleased with himself. He owned the general store, the land office, and a good chunk of the surrounding territory. He also held Jacob's markers, nearly $800 worth of debt accumulated over 18 months of spectacular losses at the poker table. "Ah, here she is," Hutchins boomed as they approached. He had a voice designed for auctioneering, big and jovial and completely devoid of actual warmth. "Right on time. Jacob, my boy, bring her on up." Jacob's hand tightened on Mara's arm. For just a second, she thought he might refuse, might wake up to what he was doing and pull her back, take her home, figure out some other way to settle his debts. The moment stretched out, fragile as spun glass. Then he pushed her toward the steps. "Go on," he muttered, still not looking at her. Mara climbed. 4 steps, rough wood splintering under her worn boots. When she reached the top, Hutchins grabbed her shoulder and positioned her at the center of the platform, turning her to face the crowd like she was a prize heifer. "Gentlemen," he called out, and the noise of the crowd settled into attentive silence. "And ladies, of course. Thank you all for coming out on this fine morning. We've got something a bit unusual for you today." Unusual. That was one word for it. As most of you know, young Jacob Hale here has found himself in a difficult financial situation. Polite chuckles from the crowd. Everyone knew. In a town like Dry Hollow, everyone knew everything. He's come to me with an unconventional but perfectly legal proposal to settle his obligations. Legal? Mara's jaw clenched. Technically, yes. In the territories, debt bondage was legal. Indenture, they called it when they wanted to sound civilized. Slavery when they were being honest, though that word made people uncomfortable so close to the war that had supposedly ended it. This here is Mara Hale, Jacob's sister, 23 years old, healthy, strong back, good teeth. Hutchins grabbed Mara's chin and turned her head side to side like he was examining a horse. She wanted to bite him, wanted to spit in his face, but she stood frozen, her body refusing to obey her fury. She can cook, clean, sew, all the domestic skills a household needs, and… He paused for effect, and Mara's stomach turned to ice. She's of childbearing age, good hips. Any man looking to build a family would do well to consider this opportunity. The crowd erupted in wolf whistles and crude laughter. Mara's face burned. Breeding stock. That's what he was selling her as. Not just a worker, but a broodmare. Now the terms are simple, Hutchins continued, raising his voice over the noise. The winning bidder will hold Mara's indenture contract for a period of 7 years. During that time, she'll work off the purchase price plus reasonable interest. After 7 years, she goes free with a small settlement, say $50 and a wagon. Fair terms, I'd say. 7 years. Mara's mind reeled. She'd be 30, an old woman by frontier standards, used up and cast aside, if she survived at all. Let's start the bidding at $25. Do I hear 25? Silence. Mara stood there, hands still bound, while the seconds crawled past and no one spoke. The sun beat down. Sweat trickled down her spine. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sound seemed to echo in the horrible quiet. "Come now, gentlemen." Hutchins' jovial tone was starting to crack around the edges. "That's less than you'd pay for a decent horse. $25 for 7 years of labor? That's a steal." More silence. A few men shuffled their feet. Someone coughed. Then, from the back, 15. Mara's eyes found the voice. Cyrus Morton, a homesteader with a mean reputation and a wife who died under suspicious circumstances 2 years back. He was smiling, showing tobacco-stained teeth. $15. Hutchins seized on it desperately. "Thank you, Mr. Morton. Excellent starting bid. Do I hear 20? 20? A different voice, younger. Tom Baker, barely 19, with more ambition than sense. Mara didn't know him well, but she'd heard things. About how he treated his horses. How he went through hired hands like other men went through tobacco. 25. Morton again, his smile widening. 30. A third bidder now, old man Jessup, who had to be pushing 70 and ran a pig farm that smelled like death even from a mile away. The bidding crept upward in painful increments. 35, 40, 45. Each number felt like a nail in Mara's coffin. She scanned the crowd, looking for… what? A friendly face? Someone who might object to this obscenity? But the people she'd known all her life just stared back. Some sympathetic, sure, but not sympathetic enough to do anything about it. Not sympathetic enough to risk Hutchins' displeasure, or to spend their own money on someone else's problem. She was alone. She'd always been alone, really, even when her parents were alive. Even when Jacob had been the big brother who'd taught her to fish and fight and ride. People left. People changed. People sold you when the price was right. That's just how the world worked. $50, Morton crowed, slapping his thigh. And that's my final offer. She ain't worth more than that, Hutchins, and you know it. Hutchins opened his mouth to respond, probably to cajole or guilt someone into bidding higher, when a new voice cut through the air. 500. The crowd went dead silent. Mara's head snapped toward the voice, along with everyone else's. A man stood at the edge of the square, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black hat pulled low against the sun. He hadn't been there a moment ago, or if he had, he'd been invisible in the crowd. "I'm sorry," Hutchins said slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Did you say $500? The man stepped forward, and the crowd parted for him like water. Cash. Right now. Hutchins' face went slack with shock. $500 was more than most men in Dry Hollow saw in a year. It was more than Jacob's entire debt. Well, that is, Hutchins struggled to recover his auctioneering patter. $500. Going once. Going twice. He paused, looking around the crowd desperately, as if hoping someone might challenge such an absurd bid. No one spoke. Sold! Hutchins brought his hand down like a gavel. To Mr. Varick, the man said, climbing the steps to the platform. Cole Varick. Cole. Mar stared at him as he approached. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-30s maybe, with weathered skin and dark eyes that gave nothing away. Not handsome exactly, but striking in a way that made you keep looking. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. He stopped in front of her, those dark eyes meeting hers for just a second before moving to Hutchins. I'll need the contract drawn up proper, Varick said, with clear terms, no hidden clauses. Of course, of course! Hutchins was practically vibrating with eagerness now. $500 would more than cover Jacob's debt, with a tidy profit left over. We can head to my office right now, and one more thing. Varick's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Hutchins shut up mid-sentence. I want to see Jacob Hale's markers, all of them. I want to verify the debt before I hand over the money. A flash of annoyance crossed Hutchins' face, but he smoothed it away quickly. Naturally, a prudent businessman, I respect that, shall we? Varick nodded. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked back at Mara. You got any belongings you need to collect? It was the first time anyone had spoken directly to her since she'd climbed onto the platform. The question threw her off balance. No, nothing. A lie. She had a small bag of clothes back at the house she'd shared with Jacob. A few things that had been their mother's, a hairbrush, a locket, a dress too fine for everyday wear. But she didn't want to go back there. Didn't want to see Jacob again. Didn't want to give him the chance to apologize or explain or make excuses. Better to leave it all behind. Start from nothing. Varick studied her for a moment, like he knew she was lying but wasn't going to call her on it. Then he nodded and turned away, following Hutchins down the steps and through the crowd toward the land office. Mara stood on the platform, abandoned again. The crowd was dispersing now that the show was over, people drifting back to their lives and their work. A few lingered to gossip, shooting curious glances at her. She looked down at her bound wrists. The rope had left angry red marks, already starting to bruise. Her whole life marked by casual cruelty, by people who were supposed to care for her but found it easier to use her instead. The sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down, and Mara Hale stood alone on an auction block in the center of Dry Hollow, waiting to be collected like a package, like property. She'd been sold for $500. She tried to make herself feel something about that, anger, fear, despair, but there was just numbness, a hollow space where feelings used to be. Maybe that was better. Maybe feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The land office was blessedly cool after the brutal sun outside. Thick adobe walls kept the heat at bay, and Hutchins had actual glass windows with curtains that blocked the worst of the light. Mara stood near the door while Varick and Hutchins conducted their business, feeling out of place and overwhelmed. She'd never been in the land office before, had no reason to, when she owned nothing and had no prospects of ever owning anything. The room smelled like paper and ink and the cigars Hutchins favored. Ledgers lined the shelves, neat and orderly, documenting who owed what to whom in this corner of the territory. Her life reduced to numbers in a book. Hutchins spread Jacob's markers across his desk, scraps of paper covered in hurried handwriting, documenting each poker game, each loss, each promise to pay that had never been kept. As you can see, the total debt comes to $783, Hutchins said, pushing his spectacles up his nose. Plus interest at 10% per annum, which brings us to— I'm not paying Jacob's debt, Varick interrupted quietly. Hutchins blinked. I'm sorry? The debt isn't mine to pay. I'm purchasing an indenture contract, not settling a debt. That's different. Well, yes, technically, but— So the price is $500 for 7 years of labor. Those were the terms of the auction. Varick's voice remained calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. Unless you want to argue that you misrepresented the sale. Hutchins' face flushed red. Now see here, I'll tell you what, Varick leaned back in his chair. I'll pay $600. That covers more than Jacob's debt and gives you a profit besides. You draw up a clean contract, 7 years, with a fair settlement at the end like you said. $50 and a wagon. I'll even throw in that she gets paid wages during her service. Say, $5 a month. Wages? Hutchins looked scandalized. For an indentured servant? For a worker. Call it what you want, but those are my terms. Take it or leave it. Mara's head was spinning. Wages? No one had mentioned wages. Indentured servants didn't get paid. That was the whole point. They worked off their debt, and if they were lucky, they got a small settlement at the end. Hutchins clearly wasn't happy, but $600 was $600. And Varick didn't look like a man who bluffed often. Fine, Hutchins said tightly. I'll draw up the contract, but I want it noted that these generous terms were your idea, not mine. Note whatever you want. While Hutchins scratched away with his pen, muttering under his breath, Varick stood and walked over to where Mara waited by the door. He moved like a man used to being in control, not aggressive about it, just certain, like the space he occupied was his by right. You all right? He asked quietly. The question surprised her so much she almost laughed. All right? Was she all right? She'd just been sold like cattle, was bound for 7 years to a man she'd never met, had been publicly humiliated and stripped of any dignity she might have had left. Fine, she heard herself say. I'm fine. Varick's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You're a terrible liar. Mara's throat tightened. She looked away, focusing on a point somewhere past his shoulder. Does it matter? Maybe not. But I'm asking anyway. Why? Because you're going to be working for me, and I like to know the people who work for me. Working for him. Not owned by him. Not belonging to him. The distinction was probably meaningless. 7 years of indenture was 7 years of indenture, no matter how you dressed it up. But something about the way he said it made her look at him again. I don't understand why you did this, she said. Why you bid so much. Morton would have stopped at 50, maybe 60. You could have gotten me for 75. Easy. Why 500? Varick was quiet for a moment. Then, because Morton's a mean drunk who would have worked you half to death and felt justified in it. Baker's not much better. And Jessup, he shook his head. You don't want to know what Jessup had planned. Mara's stomach churned. She'd been trying not to think about what might have happened if one of those other men had won, trying not to imagine. So you're saying you rescued me, she said, and couldn't quite keep the bitterness out of her voice. How noble. I'm saying I bought your contract at a fair price. What happens next is up to you. Is it? Mara gestured at her bound wrists. Because from where I'm standing, I don't have a lot of choices. Fair point. Varick reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife. Mara flinched back automatically, and something crossed his face. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. Easy, he said softly. Just the rope. He opened the blade and carefully cut through the hemp binding her wrists. The rope fell away, and Mara rubbed at the raw, angry marks left behind. Her hand shook. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the ranch. Behind them, Hutchins cleared his throat importantly. Contract's ready. I'll need both your signatures. The next few minutes passed in a blur of legal language Mara barely understood. Words like hereby and heretofore and in perpetuity swam before her eyes. Varick read the whole thing carefully, then signed with a neat, practiced hand. Your turn, Hutchins said, pushing the paper toward Mara. She stared down at it. Her name was there, Mara Elizabeth Hale, written in Hutchins' spidery script. Below it, a blank line waiting for her signature. Once she signed, it would be official, legal, binding. Can you write? Varick asked quietly. Yes. Her mother had taught her, back before the fever took her. Reading and writing and basic arithmetic, skills that were supposed to help her make a better life. Look how that turned out. Mara picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper for a long moment. Then she signed, quick and messy, the letters barely legible. There, done. Hutchins blotted the signature, examined it, and nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Now, Mr. Varick, if you'll just... Varick was already counting out bills onto the desk. Clean money, not the worn and dirty currency most people used. $600 in neat stacks. Hutchins' eyes gleamed as he scooped up the cash. "A pleasure doing business with you, sir. I hope you find her satisfactory." "I'm sure I will." Varick folded his copy of the contract and tucked it into his jacket. "Mara, you ready to go?" Ready? She'd never be ready, but staying in Dry Hollow wasn't an option anymore. Might never have been. "Yes," she said. They walked out of the land office into the pressing heat. The street had emptied out, people returning to work now that the excitement was over. In the distance, Mara could see Jacob sitting on the steps of the saloon, his head in his hands. He looked up as they passed, his eyes meeting hers for just a second. She thought he might say something, might try to apologize or justify or explain. But he just looked away again, and Mara kept walking. Some things you couldn't fix with words. Varick led her to the edge of town, where a horse waited in the shade of a scraggly cottonwood. Not just any horse. A massive bay stallion, beautifully groomed, with a saddle that probably cost more than most people's monthly wages. "You ride?" Varick asked. "A little." She'd learned as a kid, before everything fell apart. Hadn't been on a horse in years, though. "Good enough. We've got about an hour's ride ahead of us." "I thought you'd have a wagon." "Wagon's back at the ranch. Didn't know I'd be bringing anyone back with me." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then offered her his hand. "Come on. You can ride behind me." Mara hesitated. Getting on that horse meant leaving Dry Hollow, maybe forever. Meant committing to whatever came next, wherever this stranger was taking her. But what choice did she have? She was his now, by law and contract. For 7 years, her life belonged to Cole Varick. She took his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, and he pulled her up behind the saddle like she weighed nothing. Mara scrambled for purchase, finally wrapping her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. "Hold tight," he said, and nudged the horse into a walk. They rode out of Dry Hollow with the sun at their backs and the dust rising behind them. Mara didn't look back. There was nothing there worth seeing. The land opened up as they left town, rolling hills covered in scrub grass and scattered juniper. The heat was relentless, but there was a breeze at least, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. Varick's horse moved at a steady pace, not hurried but purposeful. Mara held on and tried not to think. About what she'd left behind, about what waited ahead, about the man she was pressed against, who'd paid $600 for her like she was something valuable. She'd been quiet for maybe 20 minutes when Varick spoke. "You got people? Besides your brother?" "No." The word came out flat. "Our parents died 5 years ago. Fever. It was just me and Jacob after that." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Everyone dies eventually." She felt him shift in the saddle. "That's a bleak way to look at it." "It's a realistic way to look at it. People leave, or they die, or they sell you to pay their gambling debts. Either way, you end up alone. That happened to you a lot? Getting sold?" "First time," Mara said. "But the being alone part, that I'm familiar with." Varick was quiet for a while after that. The horse's hooves clopped against the hard-packed earth, rhythmic and almost soothing. In the distance, a hawk circled, riding the thermals. "My ranch is called the 3 Rivers," Varick said eventually. "Sits where 3 creeks come together. Good water, good grazing. I've got about 40 hands working for me, plus another dozen or so who come in seasonal." Mara processed this. 40 hands was a lot. This wasn't some struggling homestead. Varick ran a serious operation. "What will I be doing?" she asked. "What do you want to be doing?" The question threw her. That's not how this works. You bought my contract. You tell me what to do." "I'm telling you to choose." "Choose what? What kind of work you want to do? You said you can cook and clean. That true? Or was Hutchins exaggerating?" "It's true. I can sew too. Mend clothes, make simple things." "Good. So you could work in the main house, help with meals and cleaning. Or if you'd rather be outside, I could use someone to help tend the vegetable garden, look after the chickens. Or—" "I can choose," Mara interrupted. "Really choose. Really choose." Felt like a trap. Like he was testing her somehow, waiting for her to say the wrong thing. But his voice was steady, genuine. And what did she have to lose by being honest? "The chickens," she said. "And the garden. I'd rather be outside." Done. Just like that? Just like that. You'll work with Maria. She manages the garden and the smaller animals. She's good people. Doesn't talk much, but she'll treat you fair. Mara's head was spinning again. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Indentured servants didn't get to choose their work. They didn't get paid wages. They didn't... Why are you being kind to me? The words burst out before she could stop them. Varric was silent for so long that Mara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, why wouldn't I be? Because I'm not. I'm just... She struggled to find the right words. You paid $600 for me. You could make me do anything. Why give me choices? Why pay me wages? Why any of it? Because you're a person, Varric said simply. Not property. The law might say different, but the law is wrong about a lot of things. Mara's throat tightened. She pressed her forehead against his back, suddenly overwhelmed. No one had called her a person in a long time. Jacob had stopped seeing her that way months ago. Hutchins never had. To them, she was a problem to be solved, a debt to be settled, a commodity to be traded. But this stranger, this man who'd paid a small fortune for her, was saying she was a person. She didn't know whether to believe him or not. You all right back there? Varric asked. No, Mara admitted, but I will be. That's the spirit. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, the heat bearing down like a physical weight. But Mara barely noticed. Her mind was too busy trying to make sense of Cole Varric, trying to figure out his angle, his game, because there had to be one. People didn't just help, not without wanting something in return. She'd figure out what he wanted eventually, and when she did, she'd be ready. Because if there was one thing Mara Hale knew how to do, it was survive. The Three Rivers came into view about an hour after they'd left Dry Hollow, and Mara's breath caught despite herself. It was beautiful. The ranch sprawled across a wide valley, with the three creeks Varric had mentioned glittering in the sunlight as they wound through the property. The main house was a sprawling structure of timber and stone, 2 stories tall with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns, bunkhouses, storage sheds, corrals. In the distance, cattle grazed on hillsides green with late summer grass. It looked like something out of a dream. Or a lie. Welcome home, Varric said, and there was something in his voice that might have been pride. Home. The word felt foreign in Mara's mouth. She'd had a home once, back when her parents were alive. After they died, she'd had a house, a place to sleep. But home? That was something else entirely. They rode into the yard, and immediately people appeared. A young man took the horse's reins as Varric dismounted. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. 2 men stopped their work at the corral fence, watching with undisguised curiosity. Varric helped Mara down, and she stood there feeling like an exhibit at a carnival. Dusty, exhausted, her wrists still bearing the marks of the rope. What must she look like to these people? Everyone, this is Mara Hale, Varric announced. She'll be working with Maria in the garden. Mara, this is... He went through names, but Mara couldn't hold on to them. Too many faces, too much information, her mind already overloaded with the events of the day. And this is Dolores, Varric was saying, indicating the woman from the house. She manages the household. Dolores, can you show Mara to her room? Let her get settled? Of course, Mr. Varric. Dolores had a warm voice tinged with a Mexican accent. She smiled at Mara, kind but assessing. Come with me, dear. You look like you could use some water and a chance to wash up. Mara followed her into the house, too dazed to do anything else. The interior was cooler, with high ceilings and windows positioned to catch the breeze. Clean, well-maintained. Nothing like the shabby house she'd shared with Jacob. Dolores led her upstairs and down a hallway, stopping at a door near the end. This is yours, she said, pushing it open. The room was small but tidy. A narrow bed with clean sheets, a dresser, a chair by the window, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. Simple furnishings, nothing fancy. But it was hers? Mr. Varric said you didn't have any belongings, Dolores continued. I'll find you some clothes to wear. We're about the same size, I think. And there's water in the pitcher if you want to wash. Supper's at 6. Someone will come get you. She started to leave, then paused. Welcome to the Three Rivers, Mara. I hope you'll be happy here. Then she was gone, closing the door softly behind her. Mara stood in the center of the room trying to process. A room of her own. Privacy. A door she could close. When was the last time she'd had that? Years. Maybe never. She walked to the window and looked out over the ranch. People moved below, going about their work. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture. The creek sparkled in the distance. It was too good to be true. Had to be. People like her didn't get second chances, didn't get rescued by wealthy ranchers, didn't end up in clean rooms with their own beds. There was a catch. There had to be a catch. Mara turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, softer than anything she'd slept on in years. She should wash up, should try to make herself presentable for supper, should do something productive. Instead, she lay down, fully clothed and filthy, and stared at the ceiling. Her wrists ached where the rope had been. Her throat was tight with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Her mind was a chaotic mess of fear and hope and confusion, all tangled together. She'd been sold that morning, auctioned off like livestock, labeled breeding stock and unwanted. Now she was here, in this beautiful place, with a man who called her a person and gave her choices. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But Mara Hale had learned a long time ago that the world didn't have to make sense. It just had to be survived. And she was still here, still breathing, still alive. That would have to be enough. For now. Mara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing, disoriented and stiff. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the air smelled wrong, unfamiliar. Then it all came rushing back. The auction. Varick, the ranch. She sat up, wincing at the protests from her body. She'd fallen asleep in her clothes, hadn't even taken off her boots. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky outside her window, painting everything in shades of gray and pale gold. Someone had been in her room while she slept. A dress was draped over the chair by the window, simple blue cotton, well-worn but clean. Next to it, a folded towel and a bar of soap that smelled like lavender. The water pitcher had been refilled. Mara's hand shook as she poured water into the basin. She hadn't heard anyone come in, hadn't woken up. What else might have happened while she was unconscious and vulnerable? Nothing, apparently. Just kindness. Just someone making sure she had what she needed. She didn't know what to do with that. The water was cold but felt good against her grimy skin. Mara stripped off her filthy clothes and washed as best she could, scrubbing away the dust and sweat and shame of yesterday. The dress fit reasonably well, a little loose in the waist, a little tight across the shoulders, but serviceable. She finger-combed her hair and wished for a mirror, then decided it didn't matter what she looked like. She was a worker now. Workers didn't need to be pretty. Mara made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The kitchen was a large, bright room with windows on two sides and a massive stove that radiated heat. Dolores stood at the counter, kneading dough, while a younger woman Mara didn't recognize tended the stove. "Good morning," Dolores said warmly. "You're up early. Most new folks sleep late their first day." "Couldn't sleep anymore," Mara said, which was true. Her body felt wired, alert, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Well, you're just in time for breakfast. Coffee?" "Please." Dolores poured her a cup from a pot on the stove, and Mara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the weak, watered-down stuff Jacob used to make. She sipped it and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "This is Anna," Dolores said, nodding toward the younger woman. "She helps with the cooking. Anna, this is Mara." Anna looked up and smiled shyly. She couldn't have been more than 16, with freckles scattered across her nose and flour dusting her apron. "Nice to meet you." "You too. Mr. Varick told us you'll be working with Maria," Dolores continued, turning back to her dough. "She usually comes in for breakfast around now. Likes to get an early start on the garden before it gets too hot." As if summoned, the back door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was older than Mara had expected, maybe 50 or so, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and skin weathered by years of sun. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints didn't work quite as well as they used to. "Maria," Dolores called, "come meet Mara. She's going to be helping you." Maria's eyes swept over Mara, assessing. Not hostile, but not particularly warm either, just measuring. "You know anything about gardening?" Maria asked. Her voice was rough, like she didn't use it often. "A little. My mother had a vegetable patch. I helped her before she died." "How long ago?" 5 years, Maria grunted. Well, it's like riding a horse. You don't forget. You eat yet? No, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel old. It's just Maria. She grabbed 2 plates from the cupboard and started loading them with food from the stove. Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, biscuits. More food than Mara had seen in one place in months. They sat at the large wooden table that dominated one end of the kitchen. Maria ate with single-minded focus, not talking, just methodically working through her breakfast. Mara picked at hers, her stomach too tight with nerves to really be hungry, but she forced herself to eat anyway. She'd learned the hard way that you never turned down food when it was offered. You never knew when the next meal might come. We start in an hour, Maria said, mopping up egg yolk with a piece of biscuit. Wear a hat if you've got one. Sun'll cook your brain otherwise. I don't have... There's extras in the mudroom. Find one that fits. Maria stood, taking her empty plate to the sink. Meet me at the garden gate. Don't be late. Then she was gone, the back door swinging shut behind her. Dolores chuckled. Don't mind Maria. She's gruff, but she's fair. Treats everyone the same, which is to say, she doesn't coddle anybody. You work hard, she'll respect you. You slack off, she'll let you know. She doesn't seem very happy about having help, Mara said. Oh, she is. Her knees have been giving her trouble, and the garden's a big job for one person. She's just not used to training someone. Give her time. Time. 7 years of it, by contract. Mara wondered if that would be enough for Maria to warm up to her, or if she'd spend those years being tolerated at best. She finished her breakfast and found the mudroom Dolores had mentioned, a small space off the kitchen filled with boots, coats, and miscellaneous tools. There was indeed a collection of hats hanging on pegs. Mara chose a wide-brimmed straw one that looked like it had seen better days but would keep the sun off her face. The garden was behind the main house, enclosed by a waist-high fence to keep out deer and rabbits. It was bigger than Mara had expected, maybe half an acre of carefully tended rows. Tomatoes, squash, beans, corn, lettuce, carrots, onions. She could see herbs growing in a separate section near the gate, and beyond that, what looked like berry bushes. Maria was already there, examining a tomato plant with the concentration of a surgeon. You're early, she said, without looking up. Good. Shows you're serious. I try to be. Maria straightened, one hand pressed to her lower back. Let me tell you how this works. I've been tending this garden for 12 years. I know every plant, every pest, every quirk of this soil. You don't touch anything without asking first. You don't make decisions without running them by me. You don't pull a weed unless you're absolutely certain it's a weed and not something useful. Understand? Yes. Good. Now see these tomatoes? Maria pointed to the plant she'd been examining. Hornworms, big green bastards that'll strip a plant bare if you don't catch them. Your first job is to go through every tomato plant and pick off any worms you find. Drop them in this bucket. She handed Mara a small wooden bucket. Inside, several fat green caterpillars writhed. Mara's stomach turned, but she took the bucket. All of them? Every single one. And check the undersides of the leaves. That's where they like to hide. It was tedious, disgusting work. The hornworms were huge and fleshy, and they held onto the plants with surprising strength. Mara had to pry them loose, trying not to think about the way they squirmed in her fingers. The sun climbed higher, and even with the hat, sweat soon dripped down her back. But it was honest work, simple. There was something almost meditative about moving from plant to plant, searching for the telltale signs of damage, finding the culprits, and removing them. Maria worked nearby, weeding between the rows with practiced efficiency. She didn't talk much, but every so often she'd call out instructions. Mind the leaves on that one? Looks like blight starting. Don't touch it, don't want it spreading. Those bean plants need watering. Use the bucket by the pump, not the one from the creek. You missed one, left side, third branch up. By midday, Mara's back ached and her hands were stained green from plant sap. The bucket of hornworms was disgustingly full. Maria inspected her work with a critical eye, checking several plants Mara had already cleared. Not bad, she said finally. You didn't miss too many. It was probably the closest thing to praise Maria was capable of giving. They broke for lunch, sandwiches and cool water brought out by Anna. Maria ate hers sitting on an overturned crate in the shade of the fence, and Mara joined her. So, Maria said after a long silence, Varric bought you at auction. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. Yes. Your brother sold you. Yes. Maria took a long drink of water. That's a hard thing. Mara didn't know what to say to that. It was a hard thing. The hardest thing, maybe. But what good did talking about it do? You know anything about Varric? Maria asked. No, I never heard of him before yesterday. He's a good man, fair. Doesn't tolerate cruelty or laziness, but he doesn't demand the impossible either. Pays decent wages, doesn't cheat people. Maria paused. He's got his reasons for doing things the way he does. Don't mistake kindness for weakness, though. He can be hard when he needs to be. Why are you telling me this? Because you've got that look about you. Like you're waiting for the trap to spring. Like you don't believe any of this is real. Mara's jaw tightened. Maybe I don't. That's your business. But I'll tell you something, suspicion will eat you alive if you let it. Sometimes things are exactly what they look like. And sometimes they're not. Maria shrugged. True enough, but you won't know which until you give it a chance. They finished lunch in silence and went back to work. The afternoon was spent hauling water, pulling weeds, and checking the other plants for pests and disease. It was hot, exhausting labor, and by the time Maria finally called it a day, Mara could barely stand upright. You did good, Maria said, latching the garden gate. Be here same time tomorrow. Mara trudged back to the house, her legs shaking with fatigue. She wanted nothing more than to collapse in her room, but Dolores intercepted her at the kitchen door. Supper's in an hour, she said. You'll want to wash up first. Use the pump around back. There's soap and towels. The water from the pump was shockingly cold, but it felt good against her overheated skin. Mara scrubbed off the worst of the dirt and sweat, then headed upstairs to change. Someone had left another dress on her chair, this one a faded green, along with clean undergarments. She was starting to understand the routine. Work all day, wash up, change clothes, eat. Simple. Predictable. Not so different from what she'd done before, except she got paid for it now and had a room of her own. Except it was completely different. Because before, she'd been surviving in the ruins of her family, with a brother who saw her as a burden at best. Now she was, what? An employee? A servant? Something in between? Supper was served in a large dining room adjacent to the kitchen. Mara had expected to eat in the kitchen with the other household staff, but Dolores directed her to the dining room where a long table was already filling up with ranch hands. They were loud and boisterous, passing bowls of food and talking over each other, trading insults and jokes with easy familiarity. Mara slipped into an empty seat near the end of the table, trying to make herself small. A few men glanced at her curiously, but most were too focused on the food to pay her much attention. Cole Varick sat at the head of the table. He'd changed from his travel clothes into a simple work shirt and pants, and there was dirt under his fingernails. He'd been working alongside his men, Mara realized, not sitting in an office or issuing orders from a distance. How was your first day? He asked, his voice carrying down the table. It took Mara a moment to realize he was talking to her. Fine, she said. Maria had me pulling hornworms. A few of the men groaned sympathetically. One, a weathered cowboy with a mustache, laughed. That's Maria's favorite job for new folks. She's testing you. Testing me for what? Whether you'll complain, whether you'll quit, whether you've got any grit. Did I pass? The cowboy grinned. You're still here, aren't you? Dinner was roast beef, potatoes, carrots, and fresh bread. More food than Mara had seen in months. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while conversations flowed around her. The men talked about work, cattle that needed moving, fences that needed mending, a problem with one of the wells. Varick listened more than he talked, but when he spoke, everyone paid attention. After dinner, most of the men drifted outside to smoke or headed to the bunkhouse. Mara started to help clear the table, but Dolores waved her away. Anna and I have this. You've done enough for one day. Go rest. Mara climbed the stairs to her room, every muscle in her body protesting. She peeled off her dress and collapsed onto the bed in just her shift, too tired to even pull back the covers. Her last thought before sleep took her was that maybe Maria was right. Maybe she was waiting for a trap that didn't exist. Or maybe the trap was just better hidden than she'd thought. The days began to blur together into a rhythm that was almost comforting in its predictability. Wake before dawn, breakfast in the kitchen, work in the garden until Maria decided they'd done enough. Lunch, more work, dinner with the ranch hands, then blessed unconsciousness in her narrow bed. Maria was a demanding teacher. She expected perfection and accepted nothing less, but she also took the time to explain why things mattered. Why you watered in the early morning or evening, never midday when the sun would scald the wet leaves. Why you planted marigolds around the tomatoes to keep certain pests away. Why you rotated crops to keep the soil healthy. Mara absorbed it all, desperate to prove herself useful, desperate to earn her place here, however temporary it might be. On her fourth day, Maria handed her a hoe and pointed at a row of beans. "Weeds are taking over. Clear them out, but mind you don't damage the roots." Mara set to work, chopping at the encroaching weeds with more enthusiasm than skill. She was so focused on the task that she didn't notice Maria watching her until the older woman spoke. "You're holding that wrong. You'll wear yourself out in an hour that way." Maria took the hoe and demonstrated the proper technique: short, efficient strokes that required less effort and accomplished more. Mara tried to copy her, felt awkward and clumsy, but kept at it. "Better," Maria said after a while. "You're a quick learner when you pay attention." It was the first real compliment Maria had given her, and Mara felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. Pathetic, maybe, to be so pleased by such small praise. But she was. That evening, as they were putting away tools, Maria asked, "You know how to shoot?" Mara blinked at the non sequitur. "A gun? No." "Might want to learn. Out here, a woman should know how to defend herself." "From what?" "Snakes, coyotes, worse things sometimes." Maria's expression was grave. "World's not a safe place, especially for women alone. Best to be prepared." "I'm not alone, though. I'm here on the ranch with, for now." "But contracts end. Life changes. You should know how to take care of yourself regardless." It was good advice, practical. But something about it made Mara's stomach twist. Maria was thinking ahead to a time when Mara wouldn't be here anymore, to the end of her 7-year contract, when she'd be set loose with $50 and a wagon and expected to make a life for herself. 7 years felt like forever and no time at all. "I'll ask Mr. Varick if he'll teach me," Mara heard herself say. Maria nodded approvingly. "Good girl." Mara waited until after supper to approach Varick. He was in his office, a small room off the main hall lined with ledgers and maps. The door was open, and he sat at his desk, making notes in a record book by lamplight. She knocked on the door frame. "Mr. Varick." He looked up, and something in his expression softened. "Mara, come in. How are you settling in?" "Fine. Good." She hovered in the doorway, uncertain. "Maria says I should learn to shoot. She said I should ask if you'd teach me." Varick set down his pen. "Maria's right. It's a useful skill out here. You free tomorrow afternoon?" "If Maria doesn't need me, yes. I'll talk to her. We'll start with the basics: safety, how to load and clean a weapon. The actual shooting comes later." "Thank you." She started to leave, but Varick's voice stopped her. "Mara, how are you really doing? And I want an honest answer, not what you think I want to hear." Mara turned back slowly. He was watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through whatever lies she might tell. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. A week ago, my brother sold me like livestock. Now I'm here, and you're all being kind to me, and I have my own room and enough to eat, and I don't know what to do with any of it." "You don't have to do anything with it. Just live, work, figure things out as you go." "It feels like there should be more to it than that." "Sometimes there isn't." Varick leaned back in his chair. "You know what I think? I think you're waiting for me to turn into the villain, waiting for the cruelty you're used to. And when it doesn't come, you don't know how to function." The words hit too close to home. Mara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Maybe," she admitted. "I'm not going to hurt you, Mara. I'm not going to work you to death or sell you or any of the other things you're afraid of. You work for me, yes. You signed a contract, yes. But that doesn't make you less than human. The law says different. The law is written by men who profit from other people's suffering. I don't put much stock in it." Mara swallowed hard. "Why did you really buy my contract? And don't tell me it was just to save me from worse men. You could have bid 75 and accomplished the same thing." Varick was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My sister was sold into indenture when she was 19. Man who bought her worked her half to death in 2 years. By the time I found her, it was too late. She died 3 days after I brought her home. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and painful. I'm sorry, Mara whispered. Me too. I've been sorry for 15 years. Varric's jaw tightened. I can't save everyone, can't fix a broken system, but when I saw you on that auction block, saw the way those men were looking at you, I couldn't walk away, not again. Mara's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded jerkily and fled before the tears she'd been holding back for days could finally break free. The shooting lessons started the next afternoon. Varric met her behind the barn, where he'd set up targets, old bottles and tin cans arranged on a fence rail. First rule, he said, holding up a revolver. Never point a weapon at anything you don't intend to shoot. Not as a joke, not to scare someone, never. Understood? Understood. Second rule, assume every gun is loaded until you've personally verified otherwise. Third rule, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. He walked her through the parts of the gun, how to load it, how to check if it was loaded, how to engage and disengage the safety. Mara tried to pay attention, but her hands shook as she held the weapon. It was heavier than she'd expected, and the metal was cold against her palm. You're afraid of it, Varric observed. Yes, good. Healthy fear keeps you careful, but don't let it paralyze you. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance, positioning her arms. His hands were warm and impersonal, like a teacher correcting a student. Feet shoulder-width apart, both hands on the grip. Breathe steady. The first time she pulled the trigger, the recoil shocked her so badly she nearly dropped the gun. The shot went wide, not even close to the targets. Again, Varric said. She fired again, and again, and again, until her ears rang and her arms ached, and she'd managed to hit exactly one bottle out of maybe 20 shots. That's enough for today, Varric said, taking the gun and carefully unloading it. You did good. I barely hit anything. You didn't shoot yourself in the foot, and you listened to instructions. That's a successful first lesson in my book. They walked back to the house together as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Mara's hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of shooting, but there was something else there too. A small, fierce satisfaction that she'd done it, that she'd held a weapon and not let her fear win. Same time next week? Varric asked. Yes, thank you for teaching me. My pleasure. That night at dinner, one of the ranch hands, the one with the mustache whose name Mara had learned was Carl, asked her how the shooting lesson went. Terrible, Mara admitted. I only hit one target. Carl laughed. That's one more than I hit my first time. Don't worry, you'll get better. You shoot? She asked. Everyone here shoots. It's part of ranch life, putting down injured animals, scaring off predators, that kind of thing. Not that we like it, but it's necessary. Another hand, younger and quieter, added, Mr. Varric makes sure we all know how. Says a worker who can defend themselves is worth more than one who can't. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Mara sat there thinking. Varric was investing in her, teaching her skills, paying her wages, treating her like she had value beyond just her labor. Why? His explanation about his sister made sense, but it still felt like there should be more to it. People didn't just help. Not in her experience, but maybe her experience was limited. Maybe there were good people in the world after all. Or maybe she was being set up for a fall so devastating she couldn't even see it coming. 2 weeks into her time at Three Rivers, Mara woke in the middle of the night to the sound of shouting. She stumbled out of bed, disoriented, and peered out her window. In the yard below, men ran toward the barn carrying buckets. Orange light flickered against the darkness. Fire. Mara grabbed her dress and pulled it on over her shift, not bothering with stockings or shoes. She ran downstairs and out into the chaos. The barn was burning, not the whole structure, just one corner, where hay was stored. But fire spread fast, and if they didn't contain it, the entire barn would go up, along with the horses trapped inside. Varric was already there, organizing a bucket brigade from the well to the fire. Men passed buckets hand to hand, throwing water on the flames with desperate efficiency. Others led horses out of the barn, the animals wild-eyed with panic. Mara! Dolores appeared at her elbow, shoving a bucket into her hands. Get in line! Mara joined the brigade, falling into the rhythm. Fill, pass, return, fill, pass, return. Her arms screamed in protest, her lungs burned from smoke, But she kept going. Everyone kept going. It took an hour to get the fire under control. By the time the last flames were extinguished, everyone was covered in soot and ash, coughing and exhausted. The barn had sustained damage, but they'd saved most of it. More importantly, all the horses had made it out alive. Varric did a head count, making sure everyone was accounted for. When he got to Mara, he paused. "You all right?" She nodded, too out of breath to speak. "Good. Get some water, catch your breath. We'll assess the damage in the morning." As people started to disperse, heading back to bed or to the bunkhouse, Maria appeared at Mara's side. "You didn't have to help," the older woman said. "Yes, I did." Maria studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're starting to understand." "Understand what?" "What it means to be part of something bigger than yourself." Later, back in her room, Mara stood at the window and watched the last few men damping down hot spots in the barn. Her hands were blistered from the bucket handles, her dress ruined, her hair reeking of smoke. But she'd helped. When the ranch was in danger, she'd run toward the crisis, not away from it. She'd worked alongside everyone else to save something that mattered. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like maybe she belonged here. Not as property, not as an indentured servant, but as part of the community. It was a dangerous feeling. Belonging meant caring, caring meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant you could be hurt. But as Mara finally crawled back into bed, her exhausted body already pulling her toward sleep, she realized she didn't care about the danger anymore. She was tired of being afraid, tired of waiting for the trap, tired of protecting herself from kindness. Maybe it was time to take a chance, to believe that not everyone would betray her, to hope that this place, these people, might actually be what they seemed. It was a fragile hope, easily broken. But it was hers. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed the barn fire settled into something Mara had never experienced before. Normalcy. The kind of life where you woke up knowing what to expect, where people said good morning and meant it, where hard work earned respect instead of resentment. She stopped jumping at sudden noises, stopped checking over her shoulder, stopped waiting for everything to fall apart. That should have been her first warning. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 months after she'd arrived at Three Rivers, when she saw the rider coming up the road. She was in the garden with Maria, tying up tomato plants that had grown tall and heavy with fruit. The sun was already hot, and sweat trickled down her back despite the early hour. "Someone's coming," Maria said, shading her eyes with one hand. "Moving fast, too." Mara looked up. The rider was still too far away to make out clearly, just a dark shape against the dusty road. But something about the way he sat his horse made her stomach clench with unease. "Probably just a messenger," Maria said, turning back to the tomatoes. "We get them sometimes, nothing to worry about." But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She watched the rider approach, her hands going still on the twine she'd been using. As he got closer, details emerged. A gray horse, foam-flecked from hard riding. A man in worn clothes, slumped in the saddle like he was exhausted. A man she recognized. "No," Mara whispered. Jacob reined in his horse at the main house, half falling out of the saddle. Varric appeared on the porch, and Mara saw him gesture toward the water trough. Jacob stumbled toward it, drinking like he'd been in the desert for days. "You know him?" Maria asked, her voice sharp. "It's my brother." Maria's expression hardened. "The one who sold you?" "Yes." "You want me to get Varric?" "No, Mara swallowed hard. "I'll handle it." She walked toward the house on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step brought her closer to a past she'd been trying to forget, to a person who'd broken something in her that might never fully heal. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to grab one of the garden tools and use it as a weapon. But mostly, she just felt tired. Jacob looked up as she approached, water dripping from his chin. He'd lost weight since she'd last seen him, and his eyes had that hollow, desperate look that meant he was either drinking more or sleeping less or both. "Mara," he said hoarsely. "Thank God. I need to talk to you." "No. Please. Just 5 minutes. I know I don't deserve it, but you're right. You don't deserve it." Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You should leave." "I can't. I need your help." "My help?" The laugh that escaped her was sharp and bitter. "You sold me, Jacob. You tied my hands and put me on an auction block and sold me to pay your gambling debts. What possible help could you need from me now? Jacob flinched like she'd struck him. I know what I did. And I'm sorry, Mara. You have to believe that. I'm sorry. Your sorry doesn't change anything. Varric appeared beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Mr. Hale, he said, his voice cold, I suggest you state your business and move on. Jacob's eyes flicked between them, calculating. This is between me and my sister. Your sister is under my protection. Anything you have to say to her, you can say in front of me. Fine. Jacob straightened, trying for dignity but achieving only desperation. I need you to come back to Dry Hollow with me. Mara stared at him. What? Just for a few days. There's some legal business with Pa's land, the homestead claim. The territory office says they need both of us to sign off on it, or the claim reverts to the government. Let it revert. I don't want anything from that place. But I do. Jacob's voice rose, cracking. It's all I have left, Mara. The land, the house. If I lose it, I've got nothing. You had me, Mara said quietly, and you sold me for $800. So forgive me if I don't care much about your nothing. Jacob's face crumpled. I was desperate. The debt, the threats, Hutchins was going to take everything anyway. At least this way, I thought. I thought you'd be taken care of. Taken care of? Mara's hands clenched into fists. I was labeled breeding stock. Men bid on me like I was livestock. Is that your idea of being taken care of? I didn't know it would go that way, I swear. I thought someone decent would— That's enough, Varric cut in. Your sister's given you her answer. Time for you to leave. But Jacob wasn't done. He looked past Varric to Mara, his eyes pleading. 3 days. That's all I need. We go to the territory office, sign the papers, and you can come right back here. Please, Mara, I'm begging you. The answer is no. I'll pay you, whatever you want. You don't have anything I want. Jacob's expression shifted then, the pleading replaced by something harder. You owe me this. I owe you? Mara's voice went dangerously quiet. I owe you? I took care of you after Ma and Pa died, kept a roof over your head, food on the table. 5 years I did that. 5 years when I could have left you to fend for yourself. You mean 5 years when you drank away everything we had? 5 years when I cooked and cleaned and tried to hold together a household while you gambled and made promises you never kept. 5 years when I was the one taking care of you, not the other way around. That's not fair. You sold me. The words exploded out of her, months of suppressed rage finally finding their voice. You looked me in the eye, tied my wrists, and sold me to settle your debts. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I owe you anything. The debt between us is paid. More than paid. Silence fell over the yard. Ranch hands had stopped their work to watch, drawn by the raised voices. Dolores stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth. Maria had emerged from the garden, a hoe gripped in her hands like a weapon. Jacob seemed to realize he'd lost. His shoulders sagged, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Mara, for everything. I know I can't fix it. I know you hate me. But I'm still your brother. No, Mara said. You stopped being my brother the day you put me on that auction block. Now you're just a stranger I used to know. She turned and walked away, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard Varric speaking to Jacob in low, firm tones, probably telling him to leave and never come back. She didn't wait to hear the end of the conversation. She just kept walking, past the garden, past the barn, out toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the property. She made it to the water's edge before the tears finally came. Harsh, ugly sobs that tore from her chest and left her gasping. She sank down on the bank, buried her face in her hands, and let herself break apart. She'd wanted to be strong, had wanted to face Jacob with cold indifference, to show him that he hadn't broken her. Instead, she'd screamed at him like a wounded animal, had let him see exactly how much he'd hurt her. Mara. She looked up to find Varric standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. Go away, she managed. No. Please, I don't want you to see me like this. Like what? Human? He sat down beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes. Doesn't make you weak. It feels weak. Strength isn't about never crying. It's about getting up after you do. Varric was quiet for a moment. He's gone. I gave him some food and water for the road and told him if he comes back, I'll have him arrested for trespassing. Thank you. You don't owe him anything, Mara. Not loyalty, not help, not even your anger. You get to decide what, if anything, he means to you now. Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He said I owed him for taking care of me after our parents died, like I should be grateful. People who hurt us are real good at rewriting history, making themselves the hero when they were never anything of the kind. I hate him, Mara whispered. I hate him so much it scares me. That's fair, he earned it. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water flow past. A bird called somewhere in the trees, a long, mournful sound. The sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down, but Mara barely noticed. I keep thinking about what might have happened, she said eventually, if you hadn't bid on me, if Morton or Baker had won, if— Don't, Varick said firmly. Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. You're here now. You're safe. That's what matters. For now, until my contract's up. Even after. You think I'm going to just throw you out after 7 years? There'll always be a place for you here, Mara, for as long as you want it. The kindness in his voice made her throat tight again. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it, every word. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? Varick turned his hat over in his hands, studying it like it held answers. Because someone should have cared about my sister. Someone should have stepped in, should have saved her before it was too late. And I can't fix that, can't bring her back. But I can make sure what happened to her doesn't happen to someone else. Not if I can prevent it. I'm not your sister. No, but you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. That's enough. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the world could contain people who helped for no other reason than because they could. But trust was hard when you'd been betrayed by the person who should have protected you most. I should get back to work, she said, standing and brushing dirt from her dress. Maria's probably wondering where I went. Take the day, Varick said. Rest, process. The garden will still be there tomorrow. I'd rather work. Keeps my mind occupied. He nodded, understanding. All right, but if you need to talk, my door's open. They walked back to the house together, and Mara tried to shake off the weight of the morning, tried to return to the routine that had become her anchor. But something had shifted. Jacob's appearance had cracked open wounds she'd thought were healing, had reminded her that the past wasn't as far behind as she'd hoped. That night at dinner, she barely tasted her food. The conversations around her seemed distant, muffled, like she was hearing them through water. She excused herself early and retreated to her room, desperate for solitude. She was sitting at the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold, when someone knocked on her door. Come in. Maria entered, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like chamomile and honey. Thought you could use this. Mara accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. Maria settled into the chair, her joints creaking in protest. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their tea. You did good today, Maria said eventually, standing up to him. Didn't feel like it. Felt like I lost control. Anger isn't the same as losing control. Sometimes anger's the only sane response to an insane situation. I wanted to hurt him, Mara admitted. When he said I owed him, I wanted to hit him, hard, but you didn't. That's what matters. Is it? Mara stared into her cup. Because right now I feel like I'm just as broken as when I got here. Like all these months of trying to build something better were just pretend. Healing isn't linear, Maria said. You don't get better in a straight line. You backslide. You have bad days. You get triggered by things you thought you dealt with. That's normal. How do you know? Maria was quiet for a long time. Then, I was married once, young and stupid, and thought I was in love. He beat me. Not every day, but enough. Enough that I learned to walk quiet, to keep my opinions to myself, to make myself small. I stayed for 3 years before I finally ran. Mara looked at her in shock. I didn't know. Why would you? It was 30 years ago. Different life, different person. Maria met her eyes. Point is, it took me a long time to feel safe again, to trust my own judgment, to stop flinching at sudden movements. And even now, sometimes something will happen, a tone of voice, a particular smell, and I'm right back there. But those moments get fewer and farther between. The good days start to outnumber the bad. What made you stay those 3 years? Same thing that keeps a lot of women trapped. I had nowhere to go. No money, no family, no options. Or at least, I thought I didn't. Turned out I was stronger than I knew. Turned out I could survive on my own. But it took hitting bottom before I believed it. Mara thought about that. About survival. About the moment you decide you'd rather risk the unknown than accept the familiar hell. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. Thank you for listening. Maria stood, her knees popping. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day. After Maria left, Mara lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to quiet. She kept replaying the confrontation with Jacob, hearing his voice, seeing the desperation in his eyes. Part of her, a small, stupid part, felt guilty for refusing to help him. But the larger part, the part that had learned hard lessons about self-preservation, knew she'd made the right choice. Jacob had burned that bridge himself. She didn't owe him rebuilding it. Sleep finally claimed her sometime after midnight, and with it came dreams. Fragmented, disturbing images of auction blocks and binding ropes and men's faces twisted with contempt. She woke before dawn, gasping, her shift soaked with sweat. The house was quiet. Mara dressed quickly and headed downstairs, desperate for coffee and the simple ritual of starting a new day. Dolores was already in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. "You're up early," Dolores said, concern evident in her voice. "Couldn't sleep." "Nightmares? How did you know?" "You've got that look, haunted." Dolores dusted flour from her hands and poured Mara a cup of coffee. "Sit, drink. Tell me if you want to talk or if you want me to shut up and let you brood." Mara almost smiled. Somewhere in between? Fair enough. They worked in companionable silence, Dolores with her bread, Mara peeling potatoes for the day's meals. The familiar motions were soothing, grounding. By the time the sun started to rise, Mara felt almost normal again. The morning passed uneventfully. Maria set her to weeding, and Mara lost herself in the repetitive task. Midday came and went. The afternoon stretched out, hot and lazy. Then the rider appeared. This one came from the south, moving at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined up in front of the main house and practically fell out of the saddle, shouting for Varick. Mara's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Varick emerged from the barn, striding quickly toward the rider. Mara abandoned her weeding and moved closer, drawn by the same instinct that made you watch an approaching storm. "Mr. Varick," the rider gasped. "Sheriff Dawson sent me. There's been a kidnapping." The words seemed to suck all the air out of the yard. Varick's expression went hard and cold. "Who?" "Thomas Wheeler, Dry Hollow merchant. Was taken from his home last night. The kidnapper left a note." "Ransom?" "Not money." The rider's eyes found Mara, and her blood turned to ice. "He wants Mara Hale. Says if she doesn't come back to Dry Hollow by sundown tomorrow, he'll kill Wheeler." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mara heard someone say her name, Varick maybe, or Maria, but it sounded distant, unreal. Jacob. It had to be Jacob. "Where is the sheriff now?" Varick's voice cut through the noise. "Organizing a search party, but the note was clear. Anyone comes looking, Wheeler dies. He wants Mara to come alone." "That's not happening," Varick said flatly. "With respect, sir, I'm just the messenger. Sheriff wanted you to know so you could decide what to do." The rider shifted uncomfortably. "He also said to tell you that if Mara doesn't show, Wheeler's blood is on her hands." "Get off my property," Varick said, his voice dangerously quiet. The rider didn't need to be told twice. He mounted up and rode off, leaving shocked silence in his wake. Mara found her voice. "I have to go." "Absolutely not. He'll kill him, Cole. He'll kill an innocent man because of me." "This isn't because of you. This is because your brother is desperate and dangerous and out of options." Varick turned to face her fully. "You walk into that trap, and you're not walking out again. Thomas Wheeler has a wife, 3 kids. He didn't do anything to deserve this. And you did? I'm the one Jacob wants, so I'm the one who has to fix this." "No." Varick's jaw was set, immovable. "I won't allow it." "You don't get to allow or not allow," Mara said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Your contract doesn't make me your property. You said so yourself." Mara took a breath, forcing herself to stay calm. I know you're trying to protect me. I know you think this is a bad idea. And you're probably right, but I can't live with myself if someone dies because I was too scared to act. Maria had appeared at her elbow. She's right, boss. This isn't your choice to make. Varric looked between them, frustration and fear warring on his face. If you go, I'm coming with you. He said alone. I don't care what he said. You're not facing him by yourself. If you come, he might panic, might kill Wheeler just to prove he's serious. And if you go alone, he might kill you both. Mara shook her head. I don't think he wants to kill me. He needs something from me, the land papers he mentioned, or maybe he thinks he can sell me again. Either way, I'm worth more to him alive. That's a hell of a gamble. It's the only play I've got. Varric was silent for a long moment. Then, you don't go unarmed, and you take a horse, one of my fastest. At the first sign of trouble, you run. You hear me? You don't try to be a hero. You run, and you don't stop until you're back here. Okay? I mean it, Mara. I said okay. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Varric insisted she take the revolver he'd been teaching her to shoot, along with ammunition and a knife for good measure. Dolores packed food and water. Maria found her a sturdy jacket that would protect against the night chill. Everyone moved with grim purpose, and Mara felt like she was watching it all from a distance. This was happening. She was really doing this. Riding back to Dry Hollow to confront the brother who'd sold her, to trade herself for a man she barely knew. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt oddly calm, detached, like her mind had decided that feeling too much right now would break her, so it was simply not. At sunset, she stood in the yard with Varric while Carl saddled the ranch's fastest horse, a gray mare with intelligent eyes and a reputation for endurance. I'll give you until noon tomorrow, Varric said quietly. If you're not back by then, I'm coming for you. Sheriff, kidnapper, the whole town of Dry Hollow be damned. Fair enough? Mara. He waited until she looked at him. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, but bravery and stupidity sometimes look an awful lot alike. Don't do anything stupid. I'll try. He handed her the reins, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment. Come back. I will. She mounted the gray mare and urged her into a trot, not looking back. If she looked back, she might lose her nerve, might realize what an insane risk she was taking, might remember all the reasons this could go catastrophically wrong. The ride to Dry Hollow took 4 hours in the fading light. Mara pushed the mare hard, but not cruelly, conserving her strength for whatever might come. The gun sat heavy against her hip, a constant reminder of the violence that might be waiting. She reached the outskirts of town just after full dark. The streets were mostly empty, windows shuttered against the night. A few lamps burned in the saloon, and she could hear the tinny sound of a piano playing badly. Mara rode slowly down the main street, alert for any sign of Jacob or Wheeler. Nothing. The town felt abandoned, wrong. Where was everyone? Then she saw it. A light in the old church at the end of town. The building had been empty for years, the congregation too small to sustain it, but someone was there now. Mara dismounted and tied the mare to a post outside. Her hands were steady as she checked the revolver, making sure it was loaded, that the safety was off. Then she walked toward the church, her footsteps loud in the silence. The door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the pews had been removed, leaving a large empty space. A single lamp burned near what used to be the altar, and there, tied to a chair in the center of the room, was Thomas Wheeler. He looked bad. Bruised face, split lip, terror in his eyes. When he saw Mara, he tried to say something through the gag in his mouth, but she couldn't make out the words. "Let him go, Jacob," Mara called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm here. That was the deal." Silence. Then Jacob stepped out of the shadows behind the altar, and Mara's breath caught. He looked worse than he had that morning, wild-eyed, unshaven, holding a knife that shook in his unsteady hand. "You came," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I said I would. Now let him go." "Not until you sign the papers." "What papers?" "The land transfer. I've got them right here." Jacob pulled a folded document from his pocket with his free hand. "You sign, Wheeler goes free. Everyone's happy. And if I don't?" Jacob's hand tightened on the knife. "Then I start cutting pieces off him until you change your mind." Wheeler made a desperate sound behind his gag, straining against the ropes. Mara forced herself to stay calm. You won't do that, won't I? You think I've got anything left to lose? I'm already dead if I don't get that land. At least this way, I get to choose how it ends. Jacob, listen to me. No. His voice cracked. You listen. You and your high and mighty attitude acting like you're better than me. Like I'm some kind of monster. I did what I had to do to survive, same as anyone would. You sold your sister. To save both of us. If I hadn't paid Hutchins, he would have taken everything. We'd have been on the street. I was trying to protect you. By putting me on an auction block? Mara took a step closer. By labeling me breeding stock? By letting men bid on me like I was livestock? That was protecting me? I didn't know it would go that way. I thought, you didn't think. You never think. You just do whatever's easiest, whatever solves the immediate problem, and damn the consequences. Another step. That's who you've always been, Jake. Selfish and weak, and looking for someone else to blame when your choices catch up with you. Jacob's face twisted with rage. Shut up. Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead. But you won't get your land, and Wheeler's wife and kids will still come after you for kidnapping and murder. You'll hang either way. I said shut up. He raised the knife, pointing it at her. Mara's hand moved to her hip, to the revolver hidden beneath her jacket. Put the knife down. Make me. I will if I have to. Jacob's eyes widened as he registered the threat. You don't have the guts. Try me. They stared at each other across the empty church, and Mara saw the exact moment when Jacob realized she meant it, that she would shoot him if he forced her hand, that the scared girl he'd sold 3 months ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned to survive. This is your fault, Jacob whispered. All of it. If you just helped me when I asked. Nothing is my fault except maybe caring about you for too long. Mara pulled the revolver, holding it steady even though her heart was racing. I'm done, Jake. Done making excuses for you, done letting you hurt me, done pretending you're anything other than what you are, a coward who destroys everything he touches. I'm your brother. No, you're a stranger wearing my brother's face. My brother died the day you tied my wrists and sold me. Her finger moved to the trigger. Now put down the knife and step away from Wheeler. Last chance. Jacob looked at the gun, at Wheeler, at Mara. She watched him calculate his options, saw desperation and rage and something that might have been shame flicker across his face. Then his shoulders sagged, and the knife clattered to the floor. I'm sorry, he whispered, sinking to his knees. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to fix things. Mara kept the gun trained on him while she moved to Wheeler, using her free hand to untie the gag. Thank you, Wheeler gasped. Thank you, I thought. Save it. We need to get out of here before he changes his mind. She was working on those ropes binding Wheeler's wrists when she heard boots on the church steps. Multiple people. The door burst open and Sheriff Dawson entered with 3 deputies, guns drawn. Nobody move! Mara froze, her hands still on Wheeler's bonds. The sheriff's eyes swept the scene. Jacob on his knees, Wheeler tied to the chair, Mara standing between them with a revolver in her hand. Miss Hale, Dawson said carefully. Put the gun down. He's the one who kidnapped Wheeler, Mara said, nodding toward Jacob. Not me. I came to get him back. I believe you, but I still need you to put the gun down. Mara hesitated, then carefully set the revolver on the floor and kicked it toward the sheriff. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. One of the deputies moved to free Wheeler while another hauled Jacob to his feet and clapped handcuffs on his wrists. Jacob didn't resist. He just stood there, empty and defeated, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Sheriff Dawson picked up Mara's gun and examined it. This Varick's? Yes. Figures. He teach you to shoot? Yes. Did you fire it tonight? No, sir. I didn't have to. Dawson nodded slowly. That's probably for the best. Killing a man, even in self-defense, it changes you. Better to avoid it if you can. He handed the gun back to her. You're free to go, Miss Hale. We'll take it from here. Mara looked at Jacob one last time. He met her eyes, and she saw everything there. Regret, shame, the desperate hope that she might forgive him. She felt nothing. Goodbye, Jacob, she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the church. leaving her brother to face the consequences of his choices alone. Outside, the night air felt clean and cold. Mara stood on the church steps, breathing deeply, trying to process everything that had just happened. She'd faced down her worst fear and come out the other side. She'd chosen to save a stranger instead of protecting herself. She'd looked at her brother, the person who'd hurt her most, and felt nothing but pity for what he'd become. The gray mare nickered softly as Mara untied her. She mounted up and turned the horse toward Three Rivers, toward home. She rode through the darkness, pushing the mare harder than was probably wise, desperate to put distance between herself and Dry Hollow. The revolver bounced against her hip with each stride, a reminder of how close she'd come to using it, how close she'd come to becoming someone she didn't want to be. But she hadn't pulled the trigger, hadn't let Jacob's desperation turn her into something violent and broken. She'd stood her ground, had spoken her truth, and had walked away when it was done. It was past midnight when she finally saw the lights of Three Rivers in the distance. Someone had left lamps burning, guiding her home. As she rode into the yard, Varric emerged from the barn, his face drawn with worry and relief. "You're back," he said, helping her down from the saddle. "You're actually back. I told you I would be. Wheeler?" "Safe. Sheriff got there in time. Jacob's in custody." Varric pulled her into a hug, and Mara let herself lean into it, let herself accept the comfort being offered. She was so tired, so wrung out and exhausted and done. "You did good," Varric said quietly. "I'm proud of you." The words broke something loose inside her, and Mara started to cry. Not the harsh, ugly sobs from earlier, but quiet tears that felt like release. Varric just held her, not saying anything, just being present. When the tears finally stopped, Mara pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I need to sleep for about a week." "I think that can be arranged." They walked to the house together, and Varric saw her to her room. At the door, he paused. "What you did tonight took real courage. Not many people would have made that choice." "I didn't really have a choice. Not one I could live with, anyway." "That's what makes it courage, doing the right thing even when it costs you." After he left, Mara changed into her nightdress and crawled into bed. Her body ached, her mind was spinning, but underneath it all was something new. Something that felt almost like peace. She'd faced her fear, had confronted the person who'd hurt her most, and refused to let that hurt define her anymore. She'd chosen to be brave when it would have been easier to hide, chosen to help when no one would have blamed her for walking away. And now she was home, safe, surrounded by people who cared about her, who saw her as more than property or a problem to be solved. For the first time in her life, Mara Hale felt free. The trial was set for the 3rd week of October, giving the territorial judge time to travel the circuit from Silver City. Mara had 3 weeks to prepare herself for what was coming. 3 weeks to figure out how to stand in front of a room full of strangers and tell the truth about the worst moments of her life. She threw herself into work instead of thinking about it. The garden was winding down for the season, the last tomatoes ripening on the vine, squash ready for harvest and storage. Maria had her digging up the potato crop, backbreaking work that left her too exhausted to lie awake at night worrying. But the night she did stay awake, her mind replayed everything. The kidnapping, Jacob's face when he realized what he'd done. Thomas Fletcher's terror. The moment she'd chosen to speak instead of staying silent. Cole found her in the garden one afternoon, pulling up the last of the carrots. He stood at the gate, watching her work for a minute before he spoke. "You don't have to testify if you don't want to." Mara sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "What do you mean?" "The prosecutor, man named Garrett, he says they've got enough to convict Jacob without your testimony. Fletcher's willing to testify about the kidnapping. I can testify about what I saw when we got there. The sheriff documented everything. So I could just not go. You could stay here. Let other people tell the story." Mara looked down at the carrots in her basket, their bright orange shocking against the dark soil. It was tempting, the idea of not having to face Jacob again, not having to relive everything in front of an audience. "But you think I should testify anyway," she said slowly. Cole shrugged. "I think it's your choice, but I also think there's something you need to say that nobody else can say for you." "What if I can't? What if I get up there and freeze or cry or make things worse?" "Then you tried. That's more than most people manage," Maria called from across the garden. These squash aren't going to harvest themselves, girl. Cole smiled slightly. I'll let you get back to work. Just think about it. He was halfway to the gate when Mara called after him. Cole? He turned. Thank you for everything. I know I haven't said it enough, but thank you. Something shifted in his expression, something warm and almost sad. You don't owe me thanks, Mara. You never did. That evening, Mara sat on the porch with Dolores, shelling peas for the next day's dinner. The older woman's hands moved with practiced efficiency, splitting pods and dropping peas into the bowl between them. You're quiet tonight, Dolores observed. Just thinking. About the trial? Mara nodded. Cole says I don't have to testify, that they have enough without me. That's true. But what do you want to do? I don't know. Mara fumbled with a pea pod, her hands not as steady as Dolores. Part of me wants to stand up there and tell everyone what Jacob did, what it felt like to be sold by my own brother, but another part of me just wants to forget any of it ever happened. Can't do both, Dolores said practically. Can't tell the truth and forget it at the same time. So which do I choose? Only you can answer that. But I'll tell you something. Keeping silent to protect yourself, that's survival. Speaking up even when it's hard, that's living. Dolores set down the pod she was working on and looked at Mara directly. You've been surviving for a long time, honey. Maybe it's time to start living instead. The words settled into Mara's chest, heavy and true. She'd spent so long just trying to get through each day, to endure whatever came. When had she last made a choice because she wanted to, not because she had to? I think I need to testify, she said quietly. Then you will, and we'll all be there with you. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear, the first real bite of autumn in the air. Mara dressed in the nicest clothes Dolores had found for her, a dark blue dress with a white collar, simple but respectable. Her hands shook as she tried to pin up her hair. Anna appeared in her doorway. Need help? Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Anna's nimble fingers made quick work of her hair, pinning it into a neat bun at the base of her neck. You'll do fine, Anna said softly. You're braver than you think. I don't feel brave. Nobody does. That's what makes it brave. Downstairs, Cole waited with the wagon. He'd dressed formally too, dark suit and tie, boots polished to a shine. He looked like a different person from the rancher she saw every day, more imposing somehow. The ride to Dry Hollow took an hour. Mara spent it in silence, watching the familiar landscape roll by. She hadn't been back since the day of the auction, and seeing the town again made her stomach clench. The courthouse was the nicest building in Dry Hollow, 2 stories of whitewashed wood with actual glass windows and a bell tower. People were already gathering on the steps, drawn by the spectacle of a trial. Mara recognized some faces from the auction, and their eyes followed her as Cole helped her down from the wagon. Stay close, he murmured. Don't let them rattle you. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls. Mara felt their stares like physical weight, heard the whispers that followed her down the aisle. Cole's hand at her elbow kept her moving forward. They sat in the front row, and Mara forced herself to look straight ahead. The judge's bench loomed empty, waiting. To the left, she could see the prosecutor's table where a thin man in spectacles was organizing papers. To the right, Jacob sat at the defendant's table wearing a suit she didn't recognize. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished. His lawyer, a portly man with impressive side whiskers, leaned over whispering to him, but Jacob's eyes were fixed on Mara. She looked away quickly, her heart hammering. The bailiff called the court to order and everyone rose as Judge Morrison entered. He was older than Mara expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face that had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by any of it. The preliminaries seemed to take forever. The charges were read: kidnapping, assault, unlawful restraint. Jacob entered his plea. Not guilty, his lawyer said, voice confident. There were mitigating circumstances. His client had been temporarily unsound, driven to desperation by circumstances beyond his control. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. Mitigating circumstances. Like that made it acceptable. The prosecutor, Garrett, called his first witness. Sheriff Dawes took the stand and described finding Thomas Fletcher tied up in the old Miller cabin, how Jacob had fled when confronted, how he'd been captured the next day trying to leave the territory. And what did Mr. Fletcher tell you about how he came to be in that cabin? Garrett asked. Objection, Jacob's lawyer said lazily. Hearsay. Sustained. Witness will only testify to what he personally observed. The dance of legal technicalities continued. Dawes described the evidence: the rope burns on Fletcher's wrists, the knife found at the scene, Jacob's confession after his capture. Jacob's lawyer tried to poke holes in it, suggesting the confession had been coerced, questioning the chain of custody on the evidence. Then it was Cole's turn. He took the stand with the same calm confidence he brought to everything, swore his oath, and described what he'd witnessed at the cabin. "And why were you there, Mr. Varick?" Garrett asked. "I was looking for Jacob Hale. He'd sent word that he wanted to discuss his sister's contract. You purchased that contract at auction, correct?" "Yes." "For how much?" $600. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jacob's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, I fail to see the relevance. It establishes motive," Garrett cut in. "Mr. Jacob Hale sold his sister for far less than she was worth, then attempted to reclaim her when he realized his mistake. The contract purchase is directly relevant to understanding why he committed these crimes." Judge Morrison nodded. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Garrett." Cole described finding the cabin, seeing Fletcher tied up, Jacob's initial attempt to negotiate before everything went wrong. He described Mara's arrival, her conversation with Jacob, the moment Jacob had dropped the knife. "In your opinion, Mr. Varick, was Miss Hale in danger during this confrontation?" "Yes. Her brother was armed and desperate. Anything could have happened. But she went anyway. Jacob's lawyer did his best to shake Cole's testimony on cross-examination, suggesting he'd exaggerated the danger, that he'd been too far away to hear what was said, that his bias toward Mara, she was his employee after all, colored his perception. Cole didn't budge, just repeated what he'd seen, calm and unshakable. When he stepped down, Garrett stood. "The prosecution calls Mara Hale." The courtroom went silent. Every eye turned to her. Mara stood on shaking legs. The walk to the witness stand felt like miles. She climbed the steps, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Louder, please," Judge Morrison said, not unkindly. She repeated the oath, forcing more volume. Then she sat, and Garrett approached with what was probably meant to be a reassuring smile. "Miss Hale, could you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" "He's my brother." "My older brother." "And you lived together before the events that bring us here today?" "Yes. Since our parents died 5 years ago." "Can you describe your living situation?" Mara swallowed hard. "It was difficult. Jacob gambled, lost money he didn't have. We struggled to pay rent, to buy food. I took in mending work when I could, but it wasn't enough." "Did there come a time when your brother proposed a solution to his financial difficulties?" "Yes. 3 months before the auction, he started talking about how I was an asset, how I could be worth something if he played his cards right." Her voice cracked. "I didn't understand what he meant at first. Didn't want to understand." "When did you learn what he planned to do?" "The morning of the auction, he woke me up, tied my hands, and told me he'd arranged to settle his debts, that I was going to be sold." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Order!" Garrett continued gently. "How did that make you feel?" "Objection," Jacob's lawyer said. "The witness's feelings are irrelevant." "Your Honor, the emotional impact of being sold by one's own family speaks to the severity of the defendant's actions." "Overruled. The witness may answer." Mara looked down at her hands. "I felt like I didn't matter, like I was just a thing to be used and discarded, like everything I thought we were, family, had been a lie. And after Mr. Varick purchased your contract, did you have any further contact with your brother?" "Not for 2 months. Then he sent word through someone in town that he wanted to talk, that he wanted to apologize." "Did you believe he wanted to apologize?" "No, but Cole, Mr. Varick, thought we should find out what he really wanted." "And what did he want?" "He'd kidnapped Thomas Fletcher, a clerk from the land office. He was holding him hostage to force me to come back, to force Cole to tear up my contract." "Why do you think he did this?" Mara finally looked at Jacob. He sat slumped at the defense table, not meeting her eyes. "Because he realized he'd made a mistake. Not selling me, he didn't regret that, but selling me too cheap. $600 was more than his debts. He wanted that money, wanted to start over somewhere else. and he thought I was his ticket to doing it. What happened when you confronted him at the cabin? This was the hard part. Mara took a breath, trying to steady herself. He had a knife. He was frantic. Kept saying I had to understand that he'd had no choice, that it was my fault for not being useful enough any other way. I told him I wasn't coming back, that I'd made my choice, and it wasn't him. How did he respond? He threatened to kill Mr. Fletcher if I didn't agree, said it would be my fault, that I was being selfish. Were you afraid? Yes. But I was also angry. So angry that he thought he could still control me, that he could make me responsible for his choices. Mara's voice grew stronger. I told him the truth, that he was weak and cruel, and that he'd failed at everything except destroying the people who loved him. And then he broke down, started crying, the knife fell, and Cole and the sheriff took him into custody. Garrett nodded slowly. One final question, Miss Hale. If you could say anything to your brother now, what would it be? Mara looked at Jacob again. Really looked at him. He was crying now, silent tears running down his face, and for just a moment he looked like the brother she'd known years ago. Before the gambling, before the drinking, before desperation had poisoned everything good in him. I tell him I'm sorry, she said quietly. Sorry that things ended this way. Sorry that he was hurting so badly he couldn't see any other way out. But I'd also tell him that what he did was wrong, that selling me, kidnapping an innocent man, threatening murder, none of that was justified, no matter how desperate he was. And I hope someday he can face what he's become and find a way to be better. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Morrison looked affected. No further questions, Garrett said. Jacob's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He tried to shake her story, suggesting she was exaggerating out of spite, that her comfortable position at Three Rivers had turned her against her own family, that she bore some responsibility for Jacob's financial troubles. Isn't it true, Miss Hale, that you could have worked harder to help with expenses? That you refused several offers of employment? Mara's jaw tightened. I worked every day, took in all the mending I could find. The offers of employment you're referring to were from men who wanted to pay me to... She stopped, unwilling to say it in court. To what, Miss Hale? To be their mistress, she said flatly. Not honest work. Degradation dressed up as opportunity. And yet you willingly entered into an indentured contract. I didn't willingly do anything. I was sold. There's a difference. The lawyer changed tactics. You testified that you chose to stay with Mr. Varick rather than return to your brother. Doesn't that suggest you benefited from this entire situation? Benefited? Mara's voice rose. I was sold like livestock, and you're asking if I benefited. You have a nice room, steady meals, employment, because a decent man chose to treat me like a human being, not because the system worked the way it should. I got lucky. But luck isn't justice, and it doesn't make what my brother did right. Judge Morrison intervened. Counsel, is there a question coming? No further questions, Your Honor. Mara was dismissed. She walked back to her seat on trembling legs, and Cole's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She held on like a lifeline. The prosecution rested. Jacob's lawyer called character witnesses, people who said Jacob had been a good man before his troubles started, that he'd been driven to desperate measures, that he deserved leniency. Samuel Hutchins testified that Jacob had been trying to settle his debts honorably, that the auction had been conducted legally. Then Jacob himself took the stand. He'd cleaned himself up, but he still looked like a man defeated. His voice was hoarse as he swore his oath. Mr. Hale, his lawyer said, can you explain to the court what led to the events we're discussing today? Jacob's hands shook. I made mistakes. So many mistakes. The gambling started small, just a way to pass time. Then I started losing. Kept thinking the next game would be the one where I won it all back. It never was. And your sister? I loved Mara. I did. But I was drowning, and I didn't know how to save myself. Hutchins suggested the indenture arrangement said it was legal, that it would clear my debts and give her a chance at a better situation. His voice cracked. I told myself I was helping her, that she'd be better off working for someone who could provide for her properly. What about the kidnapping? Jacob closed his eyes. I realized too late what I'd done, how much Varick had paid. That money could have started me over somewhere new. I thought if I could just get her back, if I could redo the auction. He shook his head. I wasn't thinking straight. The whiskey, the desperation. I grabbed Fletcher without planning it, thought I could trade him for Mara, and then everything spiraled. Do you regret your actions? Every day? Every minute? Jacob looked directly at Mara. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, doesn't undo what I did. But I'm so sorry. On cross-examination, Garrett tore into him, pointed out the contradictions, the self-serving nature of his testimony, the fact that he'd only shown remorse after being caught. If you loved your sister so much, Mr. Hale, why did you sell her in the first place? You thought she was worth more than your debts. That's what you testified. So this wasn't about helping her. It was about helping yourself. I was desperate enough to sell your own sister, desperate enough to kidnap an innocent man, desperate enough to threaten murder, but somehow not desperate enough to simply ask for help, to seek honest work, to do anything except treat the people around you as pawns in your game. Jacob had no answer to that. The closing arguments were brief. Garrett laid out the facts clinically: the kidnapping, the threats, the complete disregard for others' safety and dignity. Jacob's lawyer made an impassioned plea for mercy, talking about redemption and second chances. Judge Morrison called for a recess while he considered the verdict. In territorial courts, there was no jury, just the judge's decision. The wait felt interminable. Mara sat outside on the courthouse steps with Cole, watching Dry Hollow go about its business. People stared as they passed, some curious, some sympathetic, some openly hostile. She heard fragments of conversation. Should have stood by her brother. Poor girl. What she's been through. Barracks probably know better, just better at hiding it. Cole's jaw tightened. Ignore them. Hard to ignore when they're right in front of us. They don't know anything. They're just talking. Thomas Fletcher approached them hesitantly. He looked healthier than when Mara had last seen him. The bruises faded, but there was still fear in his eyes. Miss Hale, he said, I wanted to thank you for what you did. You saved my life. I just told the truth. That took more courage than you know. I heard what people were saying, that you should have just done what your brother wanted, that you were putting on airs above your station. That's garbage. You did the right thing. How are you doing? Mara asked. Really? Fletcher shrugged. Some nightmares, jump at sudden noises, but I'm alive and I'm working again. That's more than I had a right to expect. He excused himself, and Mara watched him walk away. Another life Jacob had damaged with his selfishness. How many others were there? How many people had been hurt by his debts, his schemes, his inability to face consequences? The bailiff appeared at the courthouse door. Court's back in session. They filed back inside. Judge Morrison sat at his bench, a paper in front of him, his expression grave. I've considered the evidence and testimony presented, he said. This case represents a troubling intersection of legal contract and moral outrage. The indenture auction itself, while distasteful, was conducted within the bounds of territorial law. However, the subsequent actions of the defendant, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and threatened violence, clearly crossed the line into criminal behavior. He looked at Jacob. Stand up, Mr. Hale. Jacob stood, swaying slightly. I find you guilty on all counts. You kidnapped an innocent man, held him against his will, and threatened his life to serve your own selfish ends. Your remorse, while noted, does not absolve you. The sentence of this court is 10 years hard labor at the territorial prison, with eligibility for parole after 7 years if you demonstrate genuine reform. Gasps from the courtroom. 10 years was harsh, but not unexpected for kidnapping. Furthermore, Morrison continued, I'm ordering that any wages you earn during your incarceration be divided, half to Mr. Fletcher as restitution for his suffering, and half held in trust for your sister, should she choose to accept it. Jacob's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, and his lawyer had to steady him. Court is adjourned. Morrison banged his gavel. Mara sat frozen as people began filing out, the buzz of conversation filling the room. 10 years. Jacob would be nearly 40 when he got out, if he survived prison at all. You all right? Cole asked quietly. I don't know. Should I feel relieved? Sad? I just feel empty. That's normal. This was never going to have a happy ending. They left through a side door to avoid the crowd. In the alley behind the courthouse, Mara finally let herself break down. She leaned against the wall and cried, not pretty, delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Cole stood guard, giving her space but staying close. When she finally ran out of tears, he offered her a handkerchief. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Don't be. You held it together in there. That's what mattered." They returned to the wagon, but before they could leave, Samuel Hutchins approached. Mara tensed, but Cole's hand on her arm steadied her. "Miss Hale," Hutchins said stiffly, "I wanted to say, that is, I owe you an apology. The auction was legal, but that doesn't make it right. I profited from your suffering, and I'm not proud of that." Mara stared at him. An apology from Hutchins was the last thing she'd expected. "What changed your mind?" she asked. "Your testimony. Hearing you describe what it felt like." He shook his head. "I've been in this business a long time. Got hardened to it, started thinking of people as numbers and ledgers. Today reminded me they're not. So I'm sorry, for what it's worth." "It's worth something," Mara said carefully. "Not everything, but something." Hutchins nodded and walked away. Cole helped Mara into the wagon, and they started the long ride back to Three Rivers. They were quiet for the first mile, just the sound of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon. Then Mara spoke. "Judge Morrison said I could choose whether to accept the money Jacob earns in prison. You could, or you could refuse it, your choice. Part of me wants to refuse, wants nothing more to do with anything connected to him. And the other part thinks about what I could do with that money, save it up, and by the time my contract's done, I'd have enough to start over properly. Not just $50 in a wagon, but real money, a real chance." Cole was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you should take it. Not because you owe him forgiveness, but because you've earned the right to build your own future. Use his restitution to do that." Mara nodded slowly. "Maybe I will." They rode on as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The trial was over. Justice had been served, for whatever that was worth. Jacob would spend the next decade in prison, and Mara would spend the next 6 years working off her contract at Three Rivers. Then what? She'd be 29 years old with money in her pocket, no ties to anyone. Free to go wherever she wanted, do whatever she chose. The thought should have been exciting. Instead, it just felt uncertain. "Cole," she said. "Yeah?" "Thank you for being there today, for all of it. Told you before, you don't owe me thanks. I know, but I'm giving it anyway." He smiled slightly. "Then you're welcome." When they got back to the ranch, the whole household was waiting. Dolores rushed out to hug Mara, and Maria actually patted her shoulder approvingly. The ranch hands offered congratulations and support, and someone had cooked a special dinner to celebrate. Mara sat at the long table, surrounded by people who'd become something like family, and felt the last of the tension drain from her body. The trial was over. The worst was behind her. Now she just had to figure out how to move forward, how to take all this pain and anger and fear and transform it into something else, something like hope. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as she looked around the table at the faces of people who'd stood by her, who'd helped her find the courage to speak her truth, Mara thought maybe, just maybe, she could do it. She'd survived the worst her brother could do to her. She'd faced him down and refused to be broken. Whatever came next, she'd face that too. And this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Winter came hard that year, early snow blanketing Three Rivers in white silence. Mara learned to navigate the cold, to wrap herself in layers and keep working even when her breath frosted in the air. The garden lay dormant beneath the snow, but there were still chickens to feed, eggs to collect, preserves to put up in the root cellar. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost peaceful. But something had shifted after the trial, some fundamental change Mara couldn't quite name. She caught Cole watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read, and she found herself watching him back. It was Maria who finally said something, 3 months after the trial. They were in the kitchen, sorting through seed catalogs for spring planting, when the older woman set down her reading glasses and fixed Mara with a knowing look. "You two gonna keep dancing around each other, or are you going to actually talk about it?" Mara's head snapped up. "What? You and Cole. The way you look at each other when you think nobody's watching, the way he finds excuses to check on the garden even though that's my territory, The way you light up when he walks into a room. I don't. Yes, you do. And he does too. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Mara's hand stilled on the catalog. Nothing. I can't do anything about it. I work for him. I'm under contract. Contract doesn't say you can't have feelings. No, but it makes things complicated. What if... Mara struggled to articulate the fear that had been gnawing at her. What if I'm just confusing gratitude with something else? He saved me, gave me a home, treated me like a person when nobody else would. Maybe I only think I care about him because of that. Maria snorted. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say, and I've heard you say some pretty stupid things when you first started and didn't know a weed from a bean sprout. It's not stupid. It's realistic. It's cowardice dressed up as wisdom. Maria leaned forward. You think I don't know what it's like to be afraid? I was married once, long time ago. Lost him to fever. Spent 10 years after that convinced I'd never let myself care about anyone that deeply again. Then I met someone, and I had to choose, stay safe and alone or risk getting hurt again. What did you choose? I chose wrong, stayed safe. And you know what? I regret it every damn day, because safe isn't living, girl. Safe is just a slower way of dying. The words hit Mara like a physical blow. She thought about all the years she'd spent protecting herself, building walls, refusing to trust or hope or want anything beyond survival. What had it gotten her? Nothing but loneliness. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. I don't know how to let someone in without being terrified they'll destroy me. Nobody does. That's what makes it worth doing. That evening, Mara found Cole in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. He looked up when she entered, and that expression crossed his face again, warm and cautious and hopeful all at once. How's she doing? Mara asked, nodding toward the mare. Good. Should be another week or so. He closed the stall door and turned to face her fully. You need something? I need to talk to you. About us. Cole went very still. All right. Mara took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that felt tangled and overwhelming. I've been thinking about something Maria said, about how I've been surviving instead of living, and I realize she's right. I've spent so long being afraid of getting hurt that I've forgotten how to want anything. Mara, let me finish, please. She twisted her hands together. I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than is smart given the circumstances, but I can't keep pretending I don't. And if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. I'll deal with it, but I need you to know. Cole closed the distance between them in 3 strides. You think I don't feel the same way? I don't know what you feel. You're hard to read. I'm hard to read? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mara, I've been in love with you since about 2 weeks after you got here. I just didn't know how to tell you without making you feel pressured or obligated. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You love me? How could I not? You're brave and stubborn, and you see through everyone's nonsense, including mine. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You face your fears even when it costs you everything. And you're so damn determined to believe you're not worth caring about that it breaks my heart. Mara's throat tightened. I'm under contract to you for 6 more years. How is this supposed to work? However you want it to work. The contract doesn't define us unless we let it. Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. I'm not your owner, Mara. I never was. You can leave tomorrow if you want, and I'd write you a reference and wish you well. I don't want to leave. Then stay, not because you're contracted to, but because you want to, and let me court you properly, if you'll have me. Court her, like she was someone worth courting, worth wooing, like she was more than just damaged goods or a worker or a charity case. I don't know how to do this, Mara whispered. I don't know how to be with someone without waiting for them to hurt me. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just us. Mara looked up at him, at this man who'd bought her contract for $600 and then proceeded to treat her like she mattered, who'd taught her to shoot, stood by her at trial, created space for her to heal, who was looking at her now like she was something precious. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was awkward and unpracticed, her first real kiss with someone she actually cared about. But Cole's arms came around her, steady and warm, and suddenly it didn't matter that she didn't know what she was doing. They'd figure it out, together. The courtship that followed was nothing like Mara had imagined from the romance novels Dolores sometimes read aloud in the kitchen. There were no grand gestures or flowery declarations, just quiet moments stolen between work, Cole bringing her coffee while she worked in the garden, Mara mending his shirts with careful stitches, walks together after dinner when the day's work was done. They talked about everything. Cole told her about his sister, about the guilt he'd carried for 15 years, about how buying Mara's contract had been his attempt to make amends for a tragedy he couldn't undo. Mara told him about her childhood before her parents died, about the mother who'd taught her to read, and the father who'd shown her how to find constellations in the night sky. They also fought. Real fights. Not the polite disagreements of people afraid to rock the boat. Mara had opinions about how the ranch should be run, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. Cole could be stubborn and high-handed when he thought he knew best. They'd argue until they were both frustrated, then sit in angry silence until one of them broke and apologized. It felt real in a way nothing else in Mara's life ever had. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. Spring came, and with it the hard work of preparing the garden for a new season. Mara worked alongside Maria, turning soil and planning what would grow where. Her hands were calloused now, her skin tanned from hours in the sun. She was stronger than she'd been, both physically and in ways harder to measure. One evening in late April, Cole found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Got something for you," he said, sitting down beside her. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from the territorial prison and a bank draft for $47. Mara stared at it. Jacob's wages. First installment. Judge Morrison's order said they'd send payments quarterly. You don't have to keep it if you don't want to. She turned the draft over in her hands, thinking about the brother who'd sold her, who was now breaking rocks in a prison quarry to pay her restitution. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject anything connected to him. But that would be cutting off her nose to spite her face, as her mother used to say. This money could give her options, freedom, a future beyond the ranch. "I'm going to save it," she said finally. "Put it somewhere safe, and when my contract's up, I'll have choices." "What kind of choices?" "I don't know yet, but I want to have them." Cole nodded. "That's fair, though I hope one of those choices involves staying here. We'll see how you feel in 6 years. You might be sick of me by then." "Not likely." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Mara leaned against Cole's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. "You know what I realized today?" she said. "What's that?" "I'm happy. Not just content or okay, but actually happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel that way again." Cole pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You deserve to be happy." "So do you." "Then I'd say we're both doing all right." The years that followed brought their share of hardships. Droughts that threatened the cattle, brutal winters that tested everyone's endurance, the constant struggle to keep a ranch running in an unforgiving land. But they also brought joy, small victories and quiet moments that accumulated into a life worth living. Mara's shooting improved until she could hit targets reliably, though she hoped she'd never have to use that skill on anything more threatening than a coyote stalking the chickens. Her gardening knowledge deepened until Maria joked she'd worked herself out of a job. The ranch hands accepted her as one of their own, and townspeople who'd watched her be auctioned off now greeted her respectfully when she came to Dry Hollow. The change in the town's attitude had been gradual but undeniable. Maybe it was the trial, hearing her testimony and seeing her dignity under fire. Maybe it was watching Cole Varick's obvious devotion to her. Maybe people just got used to the idea that she was more than what her worst day had made her. Whatever the reason, Mara found herself being treated like a person again. It shouldn't have been revolutionary. It was. 4 years into her contract, Cole proposed. They were in the garden, of course they were, harvesting the last of the summer squash before the first frost. Cole had been quieter than usual all day, and Mara had learned to recognize when he was working up to something. "Mara," he said finally, setting down his basket, "I need to ask you something." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "All right. Your contract has 3 years left. When it's up, you'll be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I want you to know that I'll honor that, no matter what you decide." "I know. But I'm hoping you'll decide to stay, not as an employee, not under contract, as my wife." Mara's breath caught. She'd known this was coming, had thought about it herself more than once. But hearing him actually say it made it real. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You could marry anyone, someone who didn't come with all my baggage, who wasn't sold at auction. Like, I don't want anyone else. I want you, baggage and all, assuming you want me with all my baggage too." Mara looked around the garden she'd helped build, at the ranch that had become home, at the man who'd given her back her life, and then asked if he could share it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married in the spring, 5 years after the auction that had brought them together. It was a small ceremony held at the ranch with just the people who mattered. Maria stood as Mara's witness, looking uncharacteristically emotional. Dolores cried through the whole thing. The ranch hands cleaned up remarkably well in their Sunday best. Judge Morrison officiated, the same judge who'd sentenced Jacob to prison. Afterward, he pulled Mara aside. "I wanted to tell you," he said quietly, "that your brother's up for parole in 2 years. He's been a model prisoner by all accounts. The board will likely approve his release." Mara absorbed this. 7 years. Jacob would have served 7 years of his 10-year sentence. He'd be 35 when he got out, still young enough to start over. "How do you feel about that?" Morrison asked. "I don't know. I haven't seen him since the trial. Haven't written. I don't know if I want to." "That's your choice to make. I just thought you should know." The parole hearing happened 18 months later. Mara didn't attend, but she read the transcript afterward. Jacob had spoken about his crimes with what seemed like genuine remorse, about the programs he'd participated in while incarcerated, about his plans to find honest work and make amends. The board granted his parole. He'd be released in 3 months. Mara told Cole about it over dinner that night. "How do you feel?" he asked, the same question Morrison had posed. Angry, sad, relieved, scared, all of it at once. She pushed food around her plate. "Part of me wants nothing to do with him, wants him to stay gone forever. But part of me remembers who he used to be before everything went wrong. What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Do I owe him forgiveness? Do I owe him another chance?" "You don't owe him anything, but if you want to see him, for your own closure, that's different." Mara thought about it for weeks, torn between the desire for a clean break and the nagging sense of unfinished business. Finally, she made a decision. She would see him. Once. Not to reconcile, not to rebuild a relationship, but to close that chapter of her life properly. Jacob was released in late August. The prison sent word that he'd found work at a lumber mill 2 territories over, that he planned to stay there and start fresh. Mara wrote him a letter, the first communication they'd had in 6 years, and asked if they could meet. He agreed. They met in Dry Hollow, in the same town where he'd sold her, though everything else about the circumstances was different. Mara rode in with Cole, though she asked him to wait at the saloon while she had this conversation alone. Jacob waited outside the general store, looking older and worn. Prison had hollowed him out, carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were clearer than she remembered, no longer clouded by alcohol or desperation. "Mara," he said when he saw her. You look good." "So do you. Better than the trial, anyway." They stood there awkwardly, 2 people who used to be family and now were something undefined. "Want to walk?" Jacob offered. They walked to the edge of town, away from curious eyes and listening ears. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jacob broke the silence. "I wrote you letters while I was in prison. Never sent them. Didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. Probably wouldn't have. Not then. And now? Now I'm here. So I guess I'm ready to listen." Jacob nodded. "I can't undo what I did. Can't take back selling you, or the kidnapping, or any of it. I was so deep in my own misery that I couldn't see past it, couldn't see that I was destroying the only family I had left." "Do you even remember what it was like before?" Mara asked. "Before the gambling, when it was just us trying to survive after Mom and Dad died? Every day. I remember you bringing home mending work even though your fingers were bleeding from the needle. I remember you making soup from scraps so we'd have something to eat. I remember how you never complained, never made me feel like a failure, even though that's exactly what I was. You weren't always a failure, Jake. You were my brother. You taught me things. You tried to take care of us. Until I didn't." His voice cracked. "Until I decided my debts were more important than your life." They reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland. Mara stopped and turned to face him fully. "I forgive you," she said. Jacob's eyes widened. "What?" "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because what you did was acceptable, but because I'm tired of carrying this anger around. It's been poisoning me for 6 years, and I'm done with it." "Mara, I can't. I'm not saying we're going to be family again. I'm not saying we'll have Sunday dinners and pretend none of this happened. What you did broke something between us that can't be fixed." She took a breath. "But I can let go of the hate. I can wish you well in your new life and mean it. That's what forgiveness is to me. Not forgetting, but choosing to stop letting it define me." Jacob was crying now, silent tears running down his face. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just be better than you were. Do something useful with the second chance you've been given. That's all I ask." They stood there for another moment, two people connected by blood and history and terrible choices. Then Mara held out her hand. Jacob took it, shook it formally, like business partners, like acquaintances, like the strangers they'd become. "Goodbye, Jake. Goodbye, Mara. And thank you." Mara walked back to town, leaving her brother behind. Cole was waiting where she'd left him, and one look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be." He helped her into the wagon, and they started the journey back to Three Rivers. Back to the life she'd built, the family she'd chosen, the future she'd claimed for herself. The seasons turned. Summer gave way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring. The cycle continued, endless and unchanging, and Mara found peace in that rhythm. A year after seeing Jacob, Mara discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her. She was 28 years old, had never imagined herself as a mother, had no example of good parenting to draw on since her own parents had died so young. But Cole was overjoyed, and gradually his excitement infected her too. Dolores fussed over her, making sure she ate enough and didn't work too hard. Maria gruffly approved and started teaching her about herbs for morning sickness and pregnancy aches. The ranch hands treated her like she was made of glass, until she snapped at them to stop being ridiculous. The baby came in early spring, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the whole house smell of rain. Labor was brutal and terrifying and longer than Mara thought anything had a right to be. But when it was over, she held a tiny, squalling girl with Cole's dark eyes and her stubborn chin. They named her Catherine after Cole's sister, the one who hadn't survived, the one he'd been trying to save all along by saving Mara. Mara looked down at her daughter, this perfect, impossible person she'd somehow helped create, and felt something shift in her chest. A fierce protectiveness, yes, but also a sense of completion. Like a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing had finally clicked into place. "She's beautiful," Cole whispered, his hand gentle on Catherine's tiny head. "She's ours," Mara said, and the wonder of it made her voice shake. Their daughter would grow up free, would never know what it meant to be sold or owned or treated as less than human, would have parents who chose each other, who chose her, who built a life based on respect instead of control. That was worth everything Mara had survived to get here. Catherine grew from infant to toddler to curious child with the alarming speed that children had. She learned to walk by pulling herself up on the garden fence, took her first steps in pursuit of the chickens, spoke her first word while Maria was teaching Mara how to prune the apple trees. The word was mine, and both women had laughed at how fitting that was. Mara taught her daughter to tend the garden, to gather eggs without frightening the hens, to read the sky for coming weather. Cole taught her to ride, to shoot, to understand the land and respect it. Together, they gave her the childhood neither of them had really had, stable, safe, full of love. When Catherine was 3, they got word that Jacob had died. A logging accident at the mill where he worked. Quick, the letter said. He hadn't suffered. Mara felt grief for the brother he'd been, relief that his suffering was over, and a strange sense of closure. He'd had 4 years after prison to live cleanly, to work honestly, to be the person he'd meant to be before desperation had broken him. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was something. She told Catherine about her uncle when the girl was old enough to understand. Told her the truth, that he'd made terrible choices, that he'd hurt people including Mara, but that people were complicated and couldn't be reduced to just their worst moments. Was he a bad man? Catherine asked, her child's mind trying to categorize, to understand. He was a man who did bad things, Mara said. There's a difference, and he tried to be better at the end. Do you miss him? I miss who he was before everything went wrong. But mostly, I'm just glad you'll never have to carry the weight of someone else's choices the way I did. Catherine thought about this seriously. I get to choose for myself? Always. No one owns you, no one controls you. Your choices are yours. It was the most important lesson Mara could teach her daughter. The one she'd learned too late, at too high a cost. The years continued to pass, marked by the rituals of ranch life and the milestones of family. Catherine grew, the ranch prospered, and Mara and Cole grew older together. There were hard years, drought that killed half the herd, a winter so brutal 2 ranch hands got frostbite, a fire that destroyed one of the barns. But they survived all of it together. On a warm evening in late summer, 15 years after the auction that had changed her life, Mara stood in the garden with her daughter and watched the sun set over 3 rivers. Catherine was 12 now, gangly and curious, asking endless questions about everything. "Mama," she said suddenly, "are you happy?" Mara looked at her daughter, surprised. "Yes." "Why do you ask?" "Anna was telling me about when you first came here, about the auction and everything. It sounded awful." "It was awful. But you're happy now?" Mara thought about it, about the long journey from that auction block to this moment, about the work it had taken to learn to trust, to love, to believe she deserved good things, about the scars that hadn't healed completely and probably never would. "I'm happy," she said. "Not because everything turned out perfect, but because I chose to make something good out of something terrible. That's what happiness is sometimes. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to build a life anyway." Catherine nodded wisely, though Mara suspected she didn't fully understand yet. She would, eventually. Life had a way of teaching those lessons whether you wanted to learn them or not. Cole appeared at the garden gate, Catherine's riding jacket in his hands. "Ready for your lesson?" Catherine whooped and ran to him, and they headed toward the stables together, her excited chatter carrying on the evening air. Mara stayed in the garden, surrounded by the plants she'd tended for 15 years, the soil she'd worked until she knew every stone and weed. This place had given her back her life. More than that, it had taught her what life could be when it was built on choice instead of obligation. She'd been sold for $600, labeled breeding stock, treated like property by the person who should have protected her most. But she'd survived. Not just survived, she'd built something beautiful out of the wreckage. A partnership based on respect. A family rooted in love. A future that belonged entirely to her. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving. People still struggled and suffered and made terrible choices. The world hadn't changed just because Mara had found happiness. But she had changed, and that made all the difference. Mara Hale Varick walked through her garden as the last light faded from the sky, touching plants she'd nurtured from seed, feeling the good ache of a day's work in her bones. Tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because this was her life, her choice, her future. And on the endless horizon of the frontier, that was worth more than any price anyone could ever put on her. She was free. Not because a contract had expired or a debt had been paid, but because she'd learned the most important truth of all. Freedom wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It was something you claimed for yourself, one choice at a time, until those choices added up to a life worth living. Mara had claimed hers, and she would never let it go.